Duns Scotus begins his philosophy with a profound question that quietly sits beneath almost every human attempt to understand reality. What makes something uniquely itself, and how can human beings know the world while still acknowledging the mystery that surrounds existence? Rather than choosing between faith and reason, or between individuality and universal truth, he attempts to build a philosophy that gives each of these their proper place. His thought becomes an ambitious effort to explain how human beings can understand reality without reducing its complexity, and how individuals can possess unique value within a vast and ordered universe. At the center of his philosophy stands a powerful conviction that would eventually distinguish him from many other thinkers of his era. Reality is not made meaningful only by broad categories or general concepts. Individual beings matter profoundly. Human beings often think in universal terms, speaking about humanity, goodness, beauty, justice, or nature itself. But every person, every object, and every being possesses a unique identity that cannot be entirely dissolved into larger abstractions. This concern with individuality becomes one of the defining themes of his thought. He asks what makes one individual truly different from another when both may belong to the same category. Two people may both be human, yet they are not interchangeable. There is something irreducibly unique about each person that cannot be explained merely by listing shared characteristics. He develops the idea that every being possesses a distinct thisness, an individual identity that makes it exactly what it is and not something else. This idea transforms the way existence is understood. Human beings are not anonymous pieces within a giant system. They are singular realities with their own value and significance. Their individuality is not accidental or secondary, but part of the very structure of existence itself. Every person, therefore, deserves attention not merely as an example of humanity, but as a unique expression of being. His philosophy also places enormous importance on the concept of being itself. He notices that human beings use the word being in many different contexts. People speak about physical objects, human minds, moral values, divine realities, and abstract concepts. Yet somehow all of these are understood as existing in some way. This observation leads him to a remarkable conclusion. The idea of being must be broad enough to apply meaningfully across different forms of reality. He argues that being can be understood in a unified sense without erasing the differences between things. This position allows reason to operate coherently, because human beings need common concepts in order to think and communicate about reality. Without some shared understanding of existence itself, knowledge would fragment into disconnected pieces incapable of forming a meaningful whole. At the same time, he remains deeply aware of the limitations of human understanding. Human beings possess impressive intellectual capacities, but they are finite creatures attempting to comprehend realities far greater than themselves. Knowledge, therefore, requires both confidence and humility. Confidence because the human mind genuinely can discover truths about the world, and humility because complete understanding always remains beyond reach. This balance between confidence and humility shapes his entire approach to philosophy. He refuses to embrace skepticism because he believes truth is accessible. Yet he also rejects intellectual arrogance because he recognizes that every answer reveals further questions waiting beyond it. Wisdom emerges not from claiming mastery over reality, but from participating honestly in its exploration. Another central idea within his philosophy concerns the relationship between intellect and will. Many thinkers before him emphasized the primacy of reason, treating the intellect as the dominant force within human beings. Scotus gives special attention to the will. Human beings are not simply creatures that understand. They are creatures that choose. This distinction becomes extremely important because understanding something does not automatically determine what a person will do. Individuals frequently know what is good while acting against it. They often recognize wise choices, yet pursue different paths. The existence of freedom reveals that human beings are not mechanical beings driven solely by rational calculation. For him, the will possesses a remarkable degree of independence. Human beings are capable of directing themselves toward different possibilities. They can resist impulses, delay gratification, and choose according to principles rather than immediate desires. This freedom forms the foundation of moral responsibility because actions become meaningful only when genuine choice exists. He believes this freedom reflects something profound about human dignity. A person is not merely a product of instincts, circumstances, or external pressures. While these influences matter greatly, individuals retain the capacity for self-direction. They participate actively in shaping their own lives through the decisions they make. This emphasis upon freedom also transforms his understanding of love. Love cannot be authentic if it is automatic or unavoidable. Genuine love requires freedom because it involves a voluntary movement toward another person or toward what is considered good. If individuals were incapable of choosing otherwise, love would become mere necessity rather than meaningful commitment. As his philosophy develops, he also becomes interested in contingency, the idea that many things within reality could have been different than they currently are. Human beings often assume that everything exists exactly as it must, yet Scotus challenges this assumption. Much of existence is not strictly necessary. Different possibilities could have unfolded. This realization introduces a sense of openness into reality itself. The future is not always predetermined in every detail. Human choices matter because alternatives genuinely exist. History unfolds through countless decisions, and these decisions shape outcomes that are not inevitable from the beginning. This openness also influences his understanding of creation. Reality is not a mechanical system operating without purpose, but an expression of freedom and intentionality. Existence itself becomes something to appreciate rather than something to take for granted because it reflects possibilities that did not have to exist at all. Throughout all these reflections, a larger vision slowly emerges. Human beings inhabit a world that is both intelligible and mysterious, ordered yet open, universal yet deeply individual. They possess reason that allows them to seek truth and freedom that allows them to shape their responses to that truth. Neither intellect nor will should dominate entirely because both contribute to a complete human life. For Duns Scotus, philosophy becomes an act of careful balance. It balances reason with humility, universality with individuality, knowledge with mystery, and understanding with freedom. Human beings are invited to explore reality deeply while never forgetting that existence always contains depths greater than any concept can fully capture. And so his philosophy begins by reminding people that every individual matters, every choice carries significance, and every search for truth unfolds within a world far richer and more mysterious than it first appears. As Duns Scotus continues his philosophy, he turns more deeply toward the relationship between freedom and human existence because he believes freedom is not a small feature added to life, but one of its defining characteristics. Human beings are not merely observers of reality. They are participants within it, constantly making choices that shape both themselves and the world around them. Every decision, no matter how ordinary, becomes part of the ongoing construction of a human life. This emphasis on freedom distinguishes him from views that portray people as entirely governed by external forces or internal instincts. He acknowledges that circumstances, habits, emotions, and social environments influence behavior, yet he insists that individuals retain a deeper capacity for self-direction. Human beings are not simply carried along by causes acting upon them. They possess the ability to step back, reflect, and choose among possibilities. Because of this, he places enormous importance on the will. The will is not merely a mechanism that follows whatever reason dictates. Human beings frequently experience moments when they know one thing but choose another. This reality reveals that reason and will are distinct powers. The intellect may present what appears good, but the will remains capable of accepting, rejecting, or postponing action. For Scotus, this capacity for genuine choice is one of the foundations of human dignity. A person is not valuable merely because they think. They are valuable because they possess the power to direct themselves intentionally. Moral life, therefore, becomes possible because people are not trapped within necessity. Responsibility exists because alternatives genuinely exist. This idea also shapes his understanding of virtue. Virtue is not simply the accumulation of good habits performed automatically. While habits matter, genuine virtue requires continual participation of the will. A person does not become good once and remain permanently good without effort. Every day presents opportunities to renew commitments, make choices, and align oneself once again with what is true and good. He believes this active participation prevents morality from becoming mechanical. Human beings are not machines programmed for goodness. Their dignity lies partly in the fact that goodness remains a living choice. Love, compassion, honesty, and justice possess meaning precisely because they are chosen rather than imposed. His reflections on love become especially important here. Scotus argues that love occupies a higher place than many people realize because love represents a free movement beyond selfishness. Human beings often begin life centered upon their own needs, fears, and desires, yet authentic love directs attention outward toward others. This movement is significant because it demonstrates that people are capable of valuing realities beyond immediate self-interest. Love also reveals something essential about relationships. Other people are not objects to be used or problems to be solved. Each person possesses unique value independent of their usefulness. His philosophy of individuality becomes especially powerful at this point, because if every individual possesses a unique identity, then every encounter carries significance. Human beings should never disappear into anonymous categories or become reduced to mere functions within society. This respect for individuality extends beyond ethics and into his understanding of knowledge itself. Human beings naturally create categories because categories help organize reality. Yet Scotus repeatedly reminds people not to lose sight of the individual while thinking in universal terms. It is possible to understand humanity as a whole while still recognizing that every person remains singular and irreplaceable. He also becomes increasingly interested in the limits of certainty. Human beings desire absolute answers because certainty provides comfort and stability. Yet reality often resists complete simplification. The world contains complexity, ambiguity, and mysteries that cannot be fully captured through human concepts alone. Wisdom, therefore, requires learning to live with some degree of uncertainty without surrendering to confusion. This balance becomes one of the most mature aspects of his philosophy. He does not advocate blind confidence, nor does he embrace endless doubt. Instead, he encourages a patient search for truth that accepts both the strengths and limitations of human understanding. The mind can know much, but it cannot know everything. His reflections on existence itself continue developing as well. He believes the fact that anything exists at all should inspire wonder rather than indifference. Human beings quickly become accustomed to reality and stop noticing its extraordinary character. They wake up each day assuming the world simply exists as it should. Yet for Scotus, existence itself is a profound mystery worthy of contemplation. Every living creature, every person, every thought, and every moment reflects the remarkable fact that reality is present rather than absent. This sense of wonder becomes an important antidote to complacency because it encourages gratitude and humility. Existence is not something to take for granted, but something to appreciate deeply. As these ideas unfold, his philosophy gradually forms a picture of human life that is both demanding and hopeful. Individuals are called to use their freedom wisely, to respect the uniqueness of others, to seek truth patiently, and to recognize that life contains dimensions far greater than immediate appearances suggest. The search for wisdom, therefore, becomes a lifelong process rather than a destination. Human beings grow through reflection, choice, love, and intellectual humility. They learn that understanding and freedom must work together and that neither can flourish without the other. And so Duns Scotus continues to guide the individual toward a vision of existence, where every person matters uniquely, every choice carries weight, and every search for truth unfolds within a world that remains both intelligible and wonderfully mysterious. One of the most unusual things about Duns Scotus is that he refuses to treat human beings as examples inside a category. Most systems of thought naturally drift toward the general. They talk about humanity, society, reason, or human nature as if people are interchangeable pieces inside a larger pattern. Scotus repeatedly pulls attention back to the individual person standing in front of you. There may be billions of human beings, but there has never been another version of this exact person, and there never will be again. That uniqueness is not a detail to overlook. It is one of the most important facts about existence. If every person is truly unique, then human life cannot be reduced to labels, statistics, or broad descriptions. It changes the way one sees other people entirely. The stranger on the street, the friend sitting beside you, and even those who disagree with you are not copies of an idea. They are singular realities that deserve attention in their own right. This idea becomes even more powerful because Scotus believes individuality is not something added later. It exists from the beginning. Human beings do not spend their lives trying to become someone unique. They already are unique. The task is learning how to live in a way that honors that fact. Many people spend years trying to fit into expectations imposed by family, society, trends, or fear. They become versions of what they think they should be instead of developing what is genuinely theirs to become. Scotus would see this as a loss because individuality is not an accident to hide, but something valuable to cultivate. At the same time, he does not encourage selfish individualism. There is a difference between uniqueness and self-importance. A person can recognize their own value while recognizing the value of everyone else around them. In fact, these two ideas support one another. Once someone truly understands that they themselves are irreplaceable, it becomes much easier to understand that every other person is irreplaceable too. Respect grows naturally from this realization because no one can simply be replaced without losing something that only they could contribute. This way of thinking also changes how he understands love. Many philosophers speak about love in terms of desire, attraction, or emotional attachment, but Scotus places enormous importance on the fact that love is a choice. Emotions rise and fall. Feelings appear and disappear. Genuine love survives beyond those fluctuations because it involves the will. To love someone is not simply to experience a feeling toward them. It is to decide that their existence matters. It is a movement outward from oneself toward another person without reducing them to an object that serves one's own needs. That distinction is important because human beings often confuse possession with love. They become attached to what another person gives them rather than appreciating who that person actually is. Scotus quietly pushes against this tendency. If every individual possesses unique value, then love cannot simply be consumption. It cannot be ownership. It must involve respect for the freedom and dignity of another person. Freedom itself occupies a remarkable place within his philosophy, not because he sees freedom as endless independence, but because he sees it as the source of responsibility. A person who cannot choose cannot truly be praised. A person who cannot choose cannot truly be blamed. Responsibility only makes sense when alternatives genuinely exist. This is why he resists any view of reality that turns human beings into machines following predetermined instructions. Every day, people experience evidence of this freedom in small ways. Someone interrupts an angry reaction before speaking. Someone forgives instead of holding a grudge. Someone changes direction after years of repeating the same mistakes. These moments may appear ordinary, but Scotus sees something extraordinary within them. They reveal that human beings are not trapped inside a fixed script. This does not mean freedom is easy. In many ways, freedom is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It forces individuals to recognize that some portion of their lives always remains in their hands. Circumstances matter enormously, and life is often unfair. But within those circumstances, people still make decisions every day about honesty, kindness, courage, resentment, patience, and effort. Character slowly emerges from those decisions. He is also fascinated by the fact that reality itself is full of possibilities. Human beings often look backward and assume everything was always destined to happen exactly as it did. Yet this is an illusion created by hindsight. Countless moments could have unfolded differently. A single conversation can redirect an entire life. A single opportunity accepted or rejected can alter the future completely. The world is far more open than people realize. This awareness creates a certain humility. Nobody stands above life, controlling every outcome. Human beings participate in reality without mastering it. They influence events without fully commanding them. There is always uncertainty ahead, and Scotus does not see this uncertainty as a flaw. In many ways, it is what makes life meaningful in the first place. A world where every outcome was already fixed would remove much of what gives existence its drama, beauty, and moral significance. Perhaps this is why wonder quietly runs through his philosophy from beginning to end. He believes people become too familiar with existence. They wake up every morning and assume reality owes them another day. They stop noticing how astonishing it is that anything exists at all. The sky above them, the people around them, the ability to think, to remember, to love, and to choose gradually become ordinary through repetition. Scotus refuses to let existence become ordinary. He invites people to recover a sense of astonishment, not because he wants them to abandon reason, but because reason itself begins with wonder. Every great question ever asked started when someone stopped taking reality for granted. The search for truth begins when a person becomes curious enough to notice that the world is stranger, deeper, and more beautiful than it first appears. His philosophy, therefore, becomes an invitation to live attentively. Notice the uniqueness of people. Notice the freedom hidden inside ordinary choices. Notice the possibilities that exist before decisions are made. Notice the fact that existence itself is something remarkable rather than automatic. Once these things are noticed, life stops feeling like a machine carrying human beings from birth to death and starts looking more like an open landscape filled with meaning waiting to be discovered. In the end, Duns Scotus keeps returning to a surprisingly simple idea. Reality is richer than human beings first assume. People naturally create categories because categories help them understand the world. But if they become too attached to them, they begin losing sight of what is directly in front of them. Entire lives can pass while speaking about humanity, society, or people in general without truly seeing an individual person for who they are. For him, individuality is not a minor detail hidden inside existence. It is one of existence's greatest treasures. Every person is a one-time event. There has never been another version of them before, and there never will be again. This is not something that must be earned through achievement or status. It is already true from the moment a person exists. Because of this, human dignity cannot depend entirely upon usefulness. People often build societies that reward productivity, intelligence, popularity, or influence. But Scotus quietly reminds us that a person's worth exists before any of those things appear. Human beings matter because they are who they are, not because of what they produce. He also refuses to see life as a giant machine where every event is fixed in advance. The future remains open in countless ways. Human choices carry genuine weight because different outcomes are possible. Every day presents opportunities to continue an old pattern or begin a new one. This freedom may not give people control over everything, but it gives them responsibility for something, and that something is enough to shape an entire life. At the same time, he never asks people to become arrogant about their freedom or their intelligence. Human understanding has limits. There will always be questions that remain unanswered and mysteries that remain larger than human explanation. Wisdom, therefore, requires two attitudes existing together at the same time: confidence that truth can be pursued, and humility that truth can never be completely possessed. Perhaps this balance is what makes his philosophy feel so enduring. It is neither pessimistic nor overly optimistic. It does not reduce people to helpless creatures, nor does it pretend they are all-powerful masters of reality. Human beings stand somewhere in between. They are finite creatures capable of extraordinary things, able to think, to choose, to love, and to shape the direction of their lives while still remaining part of a universe greater than themselves. And so his final message is not to conquer reality, but to participate in it well. Think carefully, choose deliberately, respect the uniqueness of others. Do not treat existence as something ordinary, because it is not. The fact that anything exists at all, including yourself, is already something astonishing. For Duns Scotus, a good life is not built by becoming less human, but by becoming more aware of what being human already means. It means carrying freedom responsibly, meeting others with respect, remaining curious about the world, and never allowing familiarity to destroy one's sense of wonder. Because once wonder disappears, life begins to shrink, but when wonder remains alive, even ordinary existence reveals depths that were there all along, quietly waiting to be noticed. The story of Duns Scotus begins with a question that sounds simple at first, but becomes more unsettling the longer you sit with it. Why are you you? Not why are you alive? Not why do humans exist? Why are you specifically this person and not someone else? At first, the question almost sounds childish, but if you think about it carefully, it becomes one of the strangest mysteries of existence. Out of billions of possibilities, out of endless combinations throughout history, every human being arrives as a unique individual with their own consciousness, personality, and identity. Yet philosophers for centuries often focused more on categories than individuals. They spoke about humanity, justice, goodness, and existence itself, while sometimes overlooking something extraordinarily obvious. No two people are ever exactly the same. One man would become obsessed with this fact, and that obsession would quietly transform Western philosophy forever. His name was John Duns Scotus. Today, outside academic circles, his name is far less famous than Plato, Aristotle, or Thomas Aquinas. Yet historians often describe him as one of the most influential thinkers in human history because many modern ideas about individuality, free will, and personhood carry traces of his thinking, even if people no longer realize it. To understand Scotus, we must first enter the world he inherited. He was born around 1265 or 1266 in a small village called Duns, located in what is now southeastern Scotland, close to the border with England. Medieval Europe looked entirely different from the world we know today. There were no nations in the modern sense. No universities filled with thousands of students. No internet connecting ideas instantly across continents. Yet something extraordinary was happening. Europe was experiencing an intellectual awakening. Ancient Greek philosophy, especially the works of Aristotle, had returned through centuries of preservation and translation by Islamic scholars. Universities were emerging in cities like Paris, Oxford, and Bologna. Intellectual life was exploding with energy. Students traveled enormous distances simply to sit in crowded halls and listen to scholars debate some of the biggest questions human beings had ever asked. What is existence? Can reason understand God? Do humans possess genuine freedom? What makes a person a person? These were not side conversations. They were central concerns shaping entire generations. Young Scotus grew up inside this environment. Unlike many philosophers who became famous through dramatic biographies or public controversies, Scotus was quiet. There are no grand romantic tragedies attached to his life. No enormous scandals. No revolutionary movements following him through cities. Instead, there was relentless thinking. The kind of thinking that often happens invisibly. The kind that quietly changes his civilization generations later. As a young man, he joined a Franciscan order, a religious community founded by St. Francis of Assisi. This mattered enormously because the Franciscans carried a different spirit from many other institutions of the time. They emphasized humility, poverty, and devotion while also encouraging deep intellectual inquiry. Scotus would spend his life balancing two worlds that often appear contradictory, even today: faith and reason. This was one of the defining challenges of medieval philosophy. How should human beings understand the relationship between what they believe and what they can logically prove? For centuries, thinkers had wrestled with this problem. Some leaned heavily toward faith. Others leaned toward reason. Scotus wanted something more nuanced. But before he reached those conclusions, he became known for something else: an astonishing mind. Historical accounts repeatedly describe him as possessing extraordinary intellectual speed. He could absorb enormous amounts of information, construct complex arguments, and detect weaknesses that others missed entirely. Students and scholars quickly recognized that he was operating at an exceptional level. In fact, his nickname became Dr. Subtilis, the subtle doctor. At first, modern audiences sometimes misunderstand this title. It does not mean subtle in the sense of being quiet or discreet. It referred to his extraordinary ability to distinguish between ideas that looked identical to everyone else. Where another philosopher saw one concept, Scotus saw 5 hidden layers beneath it. Where others reached conclusions quickly, he slowed down and asked whether they had overlooked something important. This habit would eventually become his superpower, and it emerged because he kept returning to one central observation. Reality is far more individual than philosophers often admit. Imagine walking through a city street. Thousands of people pass by. Most systems categorize them automatically: teacher, doctor, worker, parent, citizen, human being. Yet Scotus noticed something extraordinary hidden beneath these categories. None of those labels actually explain the individual person standing before you. The category human does not explain why one individual becomes compassionate while another becomes cruel. It does not explain why one person laughs a certain way or why another dreams differently. Something else is happening. Something unique exists within every individual that cannot simply be reduced to general definitions. This fascinated him because for centuries, philosophers often emphasized universals, the things human beings share in common. Scotus agreed these mattered, but he believed philosophy was neglecting individuality itself. And this would eventually become one of his greatest contributions. He developed a concept later called haxiety. It sounds intimidating, but the idea itself is surprisingly beautiful. It essentially means thisness, the quality that makes something uniquely itself. Not merely human. This human. Not merely a tree. This tree. Not merely a person. This specific person who has never existed before and will never exist again. For Scotus, individuality was not an accident. It was fundamental to reality itself. This may sound ordinary today because modern culture constantly celebrates individuality. But in his world, this was revolutionary. He was elevating the importance of the individual person in a way that would quietly echo for centuries afterward. And perhaps this was why his philosophy felt deeply human beneath all its complexity. He was not merely asking cosmic questions about existence. He was asking something every person eventually wonders at some point in their lives. Do I matter as an individual? Or am I simply another temporary face passing through history? Scotus believed the answer mattered enormously, because if individuality itself is woven into the fabric of reality, then every human life possesses a significance far greater than people often realize. And this idea was only the beginning. The quiet Scottish thinker who arrived in the intellectual world of medieval Europe was about to build one of the most intricate and influential philosophical systems ever created, a system that would eventually reshape how later generations understood freedom, identity, and what it truly means to exist at all. As Duns Scotus matured into one of Europe's most respected scholars, he slowly began building an intellectual system that was both incredibly complex and surprisingly personal at its core. Beneath all the technical language and difficult debates was a concern that still feels very modern today. He wanted to protect human freedom. This may not sound revolutionary at first. After all, modern people often assume freedom is natural. We grow up hearing words like choice, independence, rights, and individuality so frequently that we rarely stop to examine them. But in Scotus's world, freedom was one of the biggest unsolved problems in philosophy. If God knows everything, are human beings truly free? If reality follows a rational order, are our decisions already determined? If human nature has a fixed structure, how much control do we genuinely possess over our own lives? These questions troubled philosophers everywhere. Scotus refused to accept easy answers. What fascinated him was that human beings constantly experience themselves as creatures capable of choosing between possibilities. Every day, people stand at crossroads both large and small. Sometimes the choices are ordinary. Whether to forgive someone, whether to tell the truth, whether to remain silent, whether to act courageously or surrender to fear. And yet beneath these small decisions lies an enormous mystery. Where does choice come from? Why are human beings able to act against their own immediate interests? Animals often operate through instinct. Hunger drives behavior. Fear triggers escape. Survival dominates action. Human beings certainly possess instincts too, but Scotus noticed something peculiar about them. People regularly choose difficult paths that bring them no obvious reward. A person may sacrifice comfort for principle. A parent may suffer for a child. Someone may remain honest despite knowing dishonesty would be easier. Others may dedicate their entire lives to helping strangers they will never meet again. Pure self-interest could not fully explain these behaviors. Something deeper was happening. Scotus believed the answer lay in the human will. This became one of his greatest contributions to philosophy. Unlike some thinkers who elevated reason above everything else, Scotus believed the human will possess extraordinary importance. Reason allows people to understand possibilities, but the will ultimately chooses among them. This distinction may sound subtle, but it changes how we understand ourselves. Imagine reason as a map. The map shows multiple roads. It can explain where each path may lead. It can reveal consequences. It can analyze risks, but a map cannot walk. Something else must decide which road to take. That, for Scotus, was the role of the will. And what made the will extraordinary was that it possessed genuine freedom. This idea separated him from many other systems of thought that seemed to reduce human beings to predictable machines. Scotus insisted that people are not simply pushed around by desires or trapped inside predetermined patterns. There exists within every person a mysterious capacity to choose. Of course, this freedom also creates anxiety, because freedom sounds wonderful until responsibility arrives beside it. Human beings often want freedom in theory, while secretly wishing life would remove difficult choices altogether. There is comfort in being told what to do, comfort in following crowds, comfort in surrendering responsibility to authorities, traditions, or social expectations. Scotus understood this tension long before modern psychology gave it names. True freedom is heavy, because freedom means accepting that your choices matter. You become partly responsible for the person you are becoming. And this realization changes everything. It transforms morality from a system of obedience into something much deeper. Ethics is no longer merely about following rules. It becomes about shaping oneself through repeated acts of will. Every decision slowly constructs a person. Every habit gradually becomes character. Every choice pushes a life in one direction instead of another. This was one of Scotus's most powerful insights. Human beings are dynamic creatures constantly participating in their own creation. At the same time, Scotus was becoming one of the great intellectual stars of medieval Europe. He studied and taught at Oxford, Cambridge, and eventually Paris, the intellectual heart of Europe itself. Paris was unlike anything most people had ever experienced. Scholars arrived from distant regions carrying ideas from different traditions. Arguments filled classrooms and courtyards. Entire careers could be built or destroyed through public debates. And Scotus thrived there. Yet he remained an unusual figure. He was not known for theatrical charisma. He was not a celebrity in the modern sense. His brilliance was quieter than that. It emerged through astonishing precision. People listened because he seemed capable of seeing dimensions of problems that others entirely overlooked. Sometimes this made his work difficult. Even centuries later, students often struggle with his writings. Not because he was trying to confuse people, but because his mind operated at an extraordinary level of detail. He refused to settle for vague explanations. Every concept had to be examined carefully. Every assumption had to be tested. Every conclusion had to be earned. There is something admirable about this approach today, because modern life often rewards speed over depth. Society encourages immediate reactions, instant opinions, and simplified answers. Scotus lived almost as the opposite of this mindset. He slowed everything down. He reminded humanity that reality is often more complex than it first appears. The individual person is more mysterious than we realize. Freedom is more valuable than we appreciate. And existence itself contains layers we rarely stop long enough to examine. As his influence spread across Europe, another dimension of his philosophy was quietly taking shape. It would eventually place him at the center of one of the greatest debates in human history. What does it truly mean to love? Not romantic love, not emotional attachment, but love itself as a force that shapes reality. Because for Scotus, love was not simply a feeling humans occasionally experience. It was one of the deepest structures of existence itself. And this idea would eventually become one of the most beautiful and enduring aspects of his entire philosophy. As Duns Scotus grew older, his philosophy became increasingly centered on a question that every civilization eventually confronts, even if it uses different words to ask it. What is the ultimate force that shapes reality? Many philosophers before him had placed enormous emphasis on reason. This made sense because reason is one of humanity's greatest tools. It allows people to discover patterns, build civilizations, understand mathematics, create laws, and explain the world around them. Without reason, societies quickly descend into chaos. But Scotus noticed something reason alone could not explain. Human beings are not moved solely by logic. In fact, some of the most important moments in life have very little to do with cold, rational calculation. A mother caring for a sick child throughout endless nights is not performing a mathematical equation. A person risking their safety to help strangers is not calculating personal profit. Someone choosing forgiveness over revenge often gains no immediate advantage at all. Human beings repeatedly act in ways that seem to transcend pure rational self-interest. Scotus became fascinated by this observation because he believed it revealed something profound about existence itself. Perhaps reality is not built entirely upon logic. Perhaps beneath reason lies something equally important: love. Not love as emotion alone, not love as romance, but love as a deliberate act of willing the good for another. This distinction mattered enormously. Feelings change constantly. Human emotions rise and fall like weather. People can feel inspired one day and discouraged the next. They can feel affection one moment and frustration another. If reality depended entirely on emotions, existence itself would become unstable. Scotus believed genuine love was much deeper than feelings. Love was an act of freedom, an act of the will. One chooses to orient oneself toward goodness, toward compassion, toward others, even when emotions fluctuate. This idea would become extraordinarily influential because it offered a more mature understanding of human relationships. It suggested that love is not something that merely happens to us. It is something we actively participate in creating. Modern society often romanticizes feelings while neglecting this deeper dimension. People are taught to chase excitement, novelty, and emotional intensity. But Scotus might have gently reminded us that emotions are temporary visitors. A meaningful life requires something more stable. Commitment, deliberate care, conscious choices repeated over time. Perhaps this is one reason modern people often feel exhausted despite living in a world overflowing with options. We are surrounded by stimulation, but starved for deeper orientation. We have endless entertainment, but little silence. Endless information, but little wisdom. Scotus would likely recognize this problem immediately, because beneath all technological progress, human beings remain fundamentally the same creatures they have always been. They still struggle with fear, insecurity, loneliness, desire, and uncertainty about who they are becoming. His philosophy was, in many ways, an attempt to preserve human dignity against forces that reduce people to simple formulas. You are not merely a biological machine. You are not merely a social category. You are not merely a collection of instincts reacting to external stimuli. You are an individual person capable of genuine freedom. This belief carried enormous consequences. If every person possesses unique individuality, then human life itself becomes sacred in a profound sense. People cannot simply be treated as tools, statistics, or instruments for larger systems. This may sound obvious now, but history repeatedly demonstrates how easily societies forget this truth. Political movements emerge that reduce individuals to numbers. Economic systems emerge that measure people only through productivity. Social structures emerge that reward conformity while discouraging individuality. Scotus quietly resisted all of these tendencies centuries before they fully appeared. Every person mattered because every person possessed an irreplaceable thisness, a uniqueness that would never exist again. This idea feels strangely comforting today because modern life often creates the opposite sensation. Many people secretly feel interchangeable. They scroll through millions of faces online. They compare themselves constantly. They wonder whether their existence truly matters in a world containing billions of people. Scotus would likely answer with remarkable certainty. Yes, it matters precisely because there will never be another you. The universe does not produce duplicates. Every individual consciousness is singular. Every life is an unrepeatable event. This conviction also influenced his understanding of God. Earlier philosophers often emphasized God's power, intelligence, and perfection. Scotus certainly agreed with these attributes, but he increasingly emphasized something else. Freedom, reality itself, he believed, was fundamentally shaped by freedom rather than necessity. This was a hopeful idea, because necessity feels mechanical. Freedom feels alive. It means existence is not merely a machine operating blindly according to predetermined rules. There is room for creativity, possibility, and genuine relationship. Perhaps this explains why Scotus remains so fascinating centuries later. His philosophy is not ultimately about complicated medieval debates, though he certainly participated in many of them. At its deepest level, his work is about protecting mystery. Protecting the mystery of individuality. Protecting the mystery of freedom. Protecting the mystery of love. And protecting the mystery of what it means to be a person in the first place. As he approached the final years of his life, these ideas would become his greatest legacy. The quiet Scottish thinker who rarely sought public drama was slowly becoming one of the architects of a new way of understanding humanity itself. And his influence would eventually travel much farther than he could ever have imagined. Most people living at the time had no idea they were standing at the edge of an intellectual transformation that would quietly influence centuries of future thought. Kings would come and go. Wars would erupt and disappear into history. Entire empires would eventually collapse. Yet some ideas would survive all of them. Scotus was helping create those ideas. By now, he had developed a reputation throughout Europe's greatest centers of learning. His work was respected, debated, challenged, and admired. Scholars recognized that he was doing something unusual. While many philosophers sought elegant systems that simplified reality, Scotus kept making reality more human, more individual, and in some ways more mysterious. This was perhaps his greatest gift. He refused to flatten existence into simple formulas. Human beings often have a deep desire for certainty. We want life to be predictable. We want people to fit into categories. We want clear answers to difficult questions. We want simple explanations for complicated problems. Entire societies are built upon this instinct because certainty feels safe. But Scotus repeatedly reminded humanity that reality is richer than certainty alone. The world is not merely made of categories. It is made of persons, and persons are infinitely complex. This insight feels especially relevant today. Modern life constantly encourages simplification. Algorithms sort people into groups. Social media rewards quick judgments. Political systems divide societies into opposing camps. Individuals are reduced to labels, professions, identities, and statistics. Yet none of these things ever fully explain a person. No label can capture the entire story of a human life. A person's fears are invisible. Their memories are invisible. Their private struggles are invisible. The silent battles they fight every day remain hidden from the world around them. Scotus understood this centuries before modern psychology emerged. He understood that every person contains an inner world that cannot simply be replaced or replicated. And perhaps this is one of the reasons his philosophy continues to feel so comforting. In an age where people often fear becoming insignificant, he insisted on the opposite. Your individuality is not an accident. It is one of the deepest truths about reality itself. At the same time, he understood that individuality carries responsibility. Modern culture often celebrates individuality in superficial ways. Be unique. Be different. Stand out. But Scotus was pointing towards something much deeper than self-expression. Individuality was not permission for selfishness. It was an invitation toward responsibility. Because if every person is genuinely unique, then every choice becomes significant. Your actions cannot simply be outsourced to society. Your moral decisions matter. Your freedom matters. The person you become matters. This way of thinking creates both dignity and burden simultaneously. Perhaps this is why freedom can sometimes feel frightening. Human beings often discover that unlimited possibilities are exhausting. They search desperately for certainty because certainty relieves them from responsibility. It is easier to follow crowds than to think independently. Easier to imitate others than to build a life intentionally. Scotus quietly resisted this temptation throughout his entire career. He encouraged careful thought, careful choices, careful attention to reality itself. In many ways, he was teaching humanity how to slow down. And this may be one of his greatest lessons for our own era. Modern civilization is incredibly fast. Information moves instantly. Opinions spread globally within seconds. People consume enormous amounts of content every day without having time to truly absorb any of it. The world is louder than it has ever been. Scotus belonged to a world of silence, a world where ideas were examined patiently, where questions were allowed to breathe, where understanding required effort. There is wisdom hidden in that pace, because understanding another person requires slowness. Understanding ourselves requires slowness. Even meaning itself often requires slowness. Perhaps this is why so many modern people feel overwhelmed despite possessing access to infinite information. Information is not wisdom. Knowledge is not understanding. Speed is not depth. Scotus devoted his entire life to depth. Yet for all his intellectual achievements, his earthly life was surprisingly short. He died in 1308, likely in his early 40s. By modern standards, this feels tragically young. There is something haunting about realizing that one of the greatest philosophical minds in history had only a few decades to build ideas that would echo across centuries. But perhaps that fact itself reveals something profound. Human greatness is not measured by duration alone. Some lives burn quietly but illuminate generations. And Scotus became one of those lives. Long after his death, philosophers continued debating his ideas. Theologians built upon his work. Scholars challenged him, defended him, and expanded his arguments. Even thinkers who disagreed with him often found themselves unable to ignore him. Because once someone teaches humanity to value individuality at the deepest level, the world can never fully return to seeing people as interchangeable objects. That legacy remains alive today, whether we realize it or not. Every time societies defend human dignity, every time someone argues that a person is more than their productivity, every time individuality is treated as something sacred rather than accidental, a faint echo of Scotus still survives. In the end, perhaps his greatest achievement was not solving every philosophical problem. No philosopher has ever done that. Perhaps his greatest achievement was protecting mystery itself. The mystery that every person is singular. The mystery that freedom is real. The mystery that love is a deliberate act rather than a passing emotion. And the mystery that beneath all our categories, identities, and social roles, there exists something irreducibly human that refuses to be simplified. 7 centuries later, his voice still whispers the same message into an increasingly noisy world. You're not merely a number passing through history. You're not a copy. You are not an accident. You are an unrepeatable event in the universe. And that may be one of the most important truths a human being can ever remember.